All right. Thank you for joining us for another monthly live webinar of the Make It Happen multifamily educational platform. I am your host, Lee Fjord, and normally I'm joined by my beautiful wife, Megan Fjord, but unfortunately tonight it's just going to be me. You're going to have to deal with me alone. So we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. We're going to learn a few things about investing in commercial real estate, and most specifically about reducing expenses through property tax analysis. Property taxes are a big subject of importance today as local municipalities are trying to find ways to be able to afford the added expenses with inflation and so on and so forth. So, of course, what's their first demographic or person that they want to go after right away is property owners, because they can just go right ahead, adjust assessed values, bing, bang, boom, and then all of their worries are solved. But the truth of the matter is that that isn't exactly a perfect measure of how to determine the assessed value of a property. It's not just by clicking a button. And that's why we utilize a property tax analysis specialist company, specifically Ryan LLC. And we've got a special guest speaker here with us tonight, Matthew Wagner, who is an industry experienced individual, and we'll introduce him here in just a few minutes. So we're getting some folks continuing to join in. As you join, this is an interactive webinar. If you have questions, raise your hand. We'd love to be able to answer your questions, along the way. There will also be a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll get to you as quickly as we can. If we don't get to it, we will catch you on the Q&A session. So who are we? Well, first of all, we are Make It Happen Multifamily. We are a network of over 3,000 real estate investors nationwide that specifically focus on investing in value-add multifamily. And who am I? I am Lee Fjord. I am the founder. My wife and I founded Make It Happen Multifamily in 2020. And we have grown that group through, friends and family, and adding value in every way we can since then. We also have a real estate syndication company called Green Forest Capital. We established Green Forest Capital in 2019, and we currently have over 50 million in assets under management. We specialize in 506B and 506C syndications of mostly and most specifically multifamily value add in the Midwest and the Southeast. So why invest into a syndication? Well, the reason why you want to invest in a syndication is that you are then able to partner with industry specialists who have their career focused on specifically making sure that that asset is as successful as it possibly can be. If you were to take your $50,000 investment, let's just say, and throw it into a single family house, and that house were, empty for even a period of time, it's 100% empty when it has a single tenant move out of it. So you have a share of a much larger property as opposed to 100% of the risk and 100% of the reward from one single property. It also reduces the amount of risk that you personally take because you don't sign on debt, and you also have the benefit of taking advantage of all of the benefits of real estate investing, like appreciation, depreciation, so on and so forth. So how does that work? So first of all, we have the property up top, and then you have the investors who provide the capital to acquire the asset. Those are the Class A members. Picture there being 40 or 50 of those, if not more. And then you have the GP members, or the active side. Those folks are the ones who actually sign on the debt, do all of the work, have been in the industry for 20 plus years, know exactly how to run a 100+ unit apartment complex, and have the time, because it is what our primary focus is for our career time. Do what you do best. And what do we do best? Own and asset manage large-scale apartment complexes throughout the Southeast and Midwest. So why would you want to be a passive partner versus being your own active partner on owning 100% of the grape? Well, first of all, you get to have cash flow. That's why you invest in real estate to begin with. So you still get cash flow with your multifamily real estate syndication investment. You also get to take advantage of appreciation. So as that property increases in value, your shares of that property continue to increase in value. You also get to take advantage of refinance events and things like that as well. Tax savings, which is property taxes, or be able to take and offset your income taxes through depreciation. And we like to use a small tool called accelerated depreciation through a cost segregation in order to increase the amount of front-end tax reductions or depreciation on the front end. And then you, the investor, get to focus on doing what you do best. So Sam, for example, is a commercial construction company CEO, and his focus should be on making sure that his company is as profitable as humanly possible, so that then he can invest his hard-earned money into real estate passively, as opposed to having to worry about whether or not Becky Smith moved out of the apartment and did she leave anything behind, and did she owe anything when she moved out. That's not what his best time is best used for. So if you're interested in learning more about investing passively in multifamily real estate with Green Forest Capital, scan the QR code, book a call with me personally, Lee. We can have a conversation about that. So now that we're past the Green Forest Capital pitch, let's introduce tonight's special guest speaker, Matthew Wagner. Thank you for joining us, Matthew. Thank you for joining us. Come on and tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, a little bit about myself. I've been with Ryan LLC for 9.5 years now, specifically in the property tax practice, looking at commercial valuation and assessments and managing the appeal process. I'm located in our Chicago office. We have offices throughout the country that handle the appeal process and assessment reviews of properties in their respective markets. But my time specifically has been focused on Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. Currently, it's mainly in Illinois. And my experiences include conducting market research, completing valuation analyses through different valuation approaches to try to find appeal angles, filing those appeals when warranted, and then negotiating with the assessor or board of review to try to obtain settlements and reduce the assessments, therefore reducing the taxes.
Fantastic. That's exactly what I hate paying taxes. I think that the government is not the best steward of our money. I believe I am the best steward of our money. So if we can reduce our tax liability in any way possible, we do it. And the tax code was written that way for a purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And we feel the same way that property owners should pay their fair share and not a penny more.
Absolutely.
You could go to the next slide. So yeah, this is just an introduction of myself. And then moving forward, we have a chart here. A lot of times we get, well, where do the property taxes go? What do they do with the revenue generated by the property taxes? This is a sample graph. Granted, it's going to vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but gives you an idea of where those tax funds go. For the most part, the biggest collector of the tax income is the school districts. In this case, on the chart in front of us, it's about 38% go to the countywide schools and local schools. But again, that could vary from market to market. Here in Illinois, I'd say about 70 to 80% of the revenue goes to the school districts. Cities and towns take portions of that, the county, the state. It funds the fire district, forest reserves, libraries, things of that nature. But when you look at your real estate tax bill, it'll have what each taxing entity is and how much of those funds they get.
That's a great graph. I'm really interested to know where the state level money goes.
And yep, me as well. But that'll be somewhat outlined. Unfortunately, they don't give detail as to where exactly that money's going, but you could see some jurisdictions showing if it goes to road improvements, things of that nature. But there should be a breakdown at least of a high level where that.
Oh, I accidentally muted you as opposed to someone else. Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, no, I think I'm good here unless anyone has any questions or would like to jump in with a question.
All right.
Moving on, this is another graph we find informational, just showing a heat map throughout the country where you should expect to find higher tax rates versus lower tax rates. Starting with the bad, the higher tax rates, those are the darker shades. The Northeast, as you could see, have some of the highest tax rates in the country, whereas the West tends to have lower tax rates. And then scattered throughout the middle, you have some states with good tax rates, such as Indiana. I think it's ranked number 2 on that graph. And then right next to it, Illinois, where I'm located, and tax rates here are not favorable.
So we invest in Missouri, Arkansas, Georgia, and Louisiana. And I have a lot of people that ask me, like, why would you ever invest in Missouri? I don't understand. Like, it's a flyover state. And this is a perfect example of one of the reasons why I love investing in Missouri is it is a lower property tax state.
Yeah, absolutely. Then going through assessment of property, high level, how it works, who determines your assessment. That's going to vary from market to market. It all boils down to the assessor is the one who comes up with the value, but some markets do it differently, where they have a county assessor that values all properties within their county. Some states, such as Wisconsin, and even more so, specifically property types, manufacturing properties are assessed by the State Department of Revenue. And then here in Illinois, as an example, we have within the county, we have specific township assessors for each of their townships that make up that county. It could even be to the extent of having an assessor in the township who only does commercial properties, and then another township assessor who does the residential property. So it's going to vary depending on the location of the property. Same thing with how the property value is determined. And you'll hear that a lot throughout this presentation is that it all comes down to location, and it varies throughout the country depending where your properties are located. But properties are valued a few different ways. One is typically it's done on a mass appraisal method, and that being assessors aren't typically going to have access to the subject property's financials, income and expense statements to have the actual data for that specific property, unless some states in the Northeast do require that you submit it. But for the most part, a lot of jurisdictions don't have that. So they'll put together an income model or a mass appraisal method where they're viewing or reviewing, say, all Class A multifamilies properties built between X year to Y year. They come up with a market rent for that type of property, market expenses, vacancy, cap rate, and that's how they're determining their value. So that's where there's a good opportunity for an appeal position in a lot of cases, is when the subject's property's actual performance isn't matching up to what the assessor thinks it might be based off what they're deeming it is market, if that makes sense.
Well, there's no way it would be right on there. There's literally, I would imagine, a 1% chance that their actual assessment of the property, because commercial property is valued based upon its net operating income, income minus expenses, net operating income with a cap rate associated with it. And that cap rate, of course, is based on the market, and that changes as well. So as cap rates increase, the value of your property decreases, even if your net operating income stays the same. So imagine right now is a great time to be going out and renegotiating or reassessing and appealing these tax hikes that everybody's getting right now. Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that's where assessors are always slow to react. As you said, the cap rate is the biggest piece of that. And with that, we always say property tax is both an art and a science. There's the science behind it, that you take the NOI, you apply the cap rate, but then there's the art of making the argument that the world today isn't what it was 2-3 years ago. Cap rates are going up. Assessors tend to be slow moving to acknowledge that cap rates are going up. They're very quick when it's going down and property values are rising, but they tend to be slow to go the other way and reduce value. So that's where it's important to appeal and show them the facts and explain that the cap rates are going up and therefore the value's going down.
Government employees moving slowly? That can't be. There's no way. No. Crazy.
Absolutely. And then on top of the income model, if you could go back one, sorry.
Of course.
Assessors do have other ways to value properties. Some will rely on sales in the market and they won't consider income. For example, Wisconsin, they have a tiered evidence structure. So sales are the best evidence. The sale of this subject is the absolute best, but sales of similar properties, and then it goes income, and then so it tiers down. And other jurisdictions will look at multiple approaches to value and kind of reconcile the come. So that's why it's important when looking at your property, not just to solely rely on income, but see what other sales are doing, see what other properties, similar properties in the area are assessed for multifamily on a per unit basis. I know that's a huge approach in Texas, is the equal and uniform. So how does your property's value on a per unit basis compare to your competitive set there in the market? And then
Interesting.
as far as how often it's reassessed, that's going to, again, be dependent on jurisdiction. An example of this is Kansas reassesses properties annually, whereas Missouri is every other year, and it's the odd years. Same thing with Iowa. Illinois is unique in that Cook County is every 3 years, but the rest of the state outside of Cook County is every 4 years. So it's going to be dependent on what state you're located in. And the options to appeal your value, again, you may see a theme here, but also dependent on jurisdiction. There's some jurisdictions that you're able to have informal conversations with the assessor prior to having a formal appeal, and those can be beneficial. Just having those one-off conversations before anything formal is filed with the assessor, they might be able to adjust their values informally before they have to turn them over to certify. Then there are the board options where you could present in front of a hearing officer, board of review. In Texas, it's the appraisal review board. And then from there, if you're not satisfied with the first couple levels of appeal, there are always the court and litigation options, which do tend to take longer. There are more costs involved, but depending on the property at stake and the potential tax savings, it could be worth it.
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely worth it to have it evaluated each time.
And then this chart kind of goes over that appeal process where if informal discussions, if assessors are willing to have those, we always recommend trying those. If we were handling a property, we would attempt to informally discuss with the assessor. If they're willing to give us a reduction, maybe it's not down to our target value, we would review it, determine if we think it's a fair offer. Maybe, we had an argument on the cap rate, we met in the middle, and it is reasonable. We might have been aggressive on the front end. We would provide an update to the property owner saying, hey, we got you this offer. The assessor's willing to come down to here. It's going to reduce your taxes to approximately this much, result in this much in savings. If accepted, we could sign a stipulation with the assessor, have that appeal finalized, have the reduced value enrolled. If not, you always have the option to turn down that offer or in some cases accept the offer and still appeal further to that board level, which is a little bit more formal. In some cases, even that time between when you file an official appeal to the board and when the hearing takes place, you could still negotiate with the assessor, and that would kind of fall in that informal process still. At the end of a formal hearing, you'll get a decision notice. And then from there, that's when you could either finalize the appeal at that point or take it beyond. I know Illinois, we do it a lot where we go to the property tax appeal board or circuit court. Again, those appeals could typically take a little bit longer. Here in Illinois, I know it's about 3 to 5 years for those types of appeals. Down in Texas, litigation is very common. Those only take about a year or two. And if we did approach it that way and get a reduction, we would track the tax savings. Typically at the further levels, it's a refund check because the tax bills have already been paid. So we would handle tracking those refunds, making sure they're getting issued, making sure they're received. And typically with the informal and board level appeals, those generally result in tax savings based off a tax bill that's going to be based on that reduced assessment. So those are always beneficial to obtain those informals or board first level appeals so that you're paying the actual taxes on that reduced value as opposed to paying on the full amount and then having to wait a couple of years to get a refund and get some of those funds back.
So it's essentially like a mediation process as opposed to going straight into litigation, from what I'm understanding.
Right. And depending on the jurisdiction, some boards are easier to work with. Wisconsin, on the other hand, and we'll get into this a little bit later too, but they're typically a rubber stamp of the assessor's decision. So it's really important to know your market and what the different levels of appeal are and the chances of success at each level.
Absolutely. And I'm sure that's something that with doing hundreds of these a year, which areas, which markets are worth trying extra hard to go for more of a tax appeal versus other markets that might be, much more difficult.
Absolutely. And that's why I love the way Ryan is set up, that we have offices throughout the country. So we have the local boots on the ground in all of these markets that have relationships with these assessors. They know the markets like the back of their hands. So they know where you could push, where you can't. where you could be a little bit more aggressive in assumptions, where you should maybe not be so aggressive, or expect, kind of tamper those expectations down. And that's really what we cover here on this slide too, is how to determine the appeal success and being aware of appeal challenges in the state and jurisdiction. So perfect example being Wisconsin. You may go in with a target value that might be aggressive, or it may not, but the assessor isn't willing to go down to your target value, and they're willing to maybe meet you in the middle and reduce the value. You might not feel that it's a great offer, and that there's more savings to be had. However, knowing Wisconsin, knowing Wisconsin, and knowing the board is a typical rubber stamp of the assessor's decision. So they would pull their offer and defend their original value. And there's a chance you go to the board, and it's a strong likelihood that they would no change the value or sustain the assessor's original value, and you won't get any reduction. Then you have to weigh the benefit of, well, now is there enough savings at stake for the attorney to file the litigation appeal, to get an appraisal, and all those costs that could start chipping away very quickly at your potential tax savings. Another thing to be important about, if you could go back one, sorry, Lee.
Of course, sorry.
Is staying up to date on recent legislative changes. Again, my focus is more in the Midwest, but I did recently have a call with the property owner and our Maryland team that there is proposed legislation for rent control on multifamily properties. So those are going to have a direct impact on valuation and increases to those cap rates, because now investors don't look at those properties as valuable as they once did, because there's not really that value add opportunity. You're limited on the rent growth that could drive, increases to your revenue. So because of that, the market's going to have to adjust. Cap rates are going to have to go up, and that proposed legislation could have a drastic impact on multifamily values.
Even just the legislation being proposed changes, the value of a property. Yeah, not even in passing. Yeah,
exactly. Even just having it proposed, if a property's on the market yesterday, before this gets proposed, it might have, one asking price, offers might be coming in at one value, but the second that legislation's proposed, that value just went down, because investors aren't going to be as comfortable until the outcome of this legislation, whether it passes or not.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
And then another big thing to do is also manage your appeal deadlines. If you have properties throughout the United States, they're going to vary by jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Minnesota is a good example. They have the same deadline every year of April 30th. California is either September 15th or November 30th. But then you have states like Illinois, Missouri, where it's all dependent on when those assessment notices are released, and typically tied to 30 days after the date on that assessment notice. So that's why it's important to keep track of your appeal deadlines and make sure you're managing those.
Yeah, what we've done is establish a relationship with Ryan, where they actually touch base with us every 90 days about each and every one of our properties that we currently hold, letting us know where we're at with our property tax reassessments that are coming up, whether that's this quarter or 4 quarters from now, or even 2 years from now. Like, oh, it just happened. Well, 2 years from now, we've got some time. So they actually keep track of all of those timelines for us, and then we don't actually end up in a place where we miss that deadline. That's the one thing we don't want to do, is end up in a situation where, well, it would have been nice if you'd have called me last month, because then you would have been able to appeal. But sorry, you'll call me in 2 more years. So thankfully, we've got that established as of today with Ryan, and they're really helpful when it comes to that.
Thank you, Lee, and happy to help with that. Now, looking at when you're acquiring properties, just a few items to consider upon transaction. The first thing is there any furniture, fixtures, equipment, or personal property that you could pull from that purchase price, or intangible value that you could pull from that purchase price to lower what's attributable to the real estate itself? An example of this is mainly in disclosure states like Illinois, where you have to fill out a real estate transfer form when you're purchasing a property. If you could pull out supported, and it has to be supported, so you can't just pull out everything but $1 and say, oh, everything else is personal property. It has to be a supportable number. But if you could pull that out and lower the amount that's showing as the real estate amount, that's the value the assessors are going to get, and what they're going to put on their website as the sale price, and what assessors are going to try to hold you to as a sale price. So it is always beneficial to keep that in mind. Another item to consider is in some states, there are potential rollbacks for developing on agricultural land and changing that use. A lot of jurisdictions tax agricultural land very favorably with a lower assessment or a lower tax rate. And there's a chance once it loses that ag designation, that I believe it was Texas, and I think there might have been legislation that changed this, but they could go back 3 years and they had what the assessment would have been if it wasn't farmland, and then charge the difference in those what it was as ag land to what it would have been if it wasn't, as well as interest. So it's always important to know the jurisdiction you're looking into if you're looking at something that has an agricultural classification, just to make sure if there's any ramifications of purchasing that and changing its use.
Wow. I've never been part of that, but man, that'd be scary because, you know, I've seen properties that when I look it up, it's an apartment complex, but it's actually being taxed as ag land, and man, they can go back on you 3 years. That's crazy.
It was, I believe they may have changed the legislation on it, but I remember a few years ago, there was that exact situation where they purchased the property and weren't aware that it was classified as ag when the developer started developing it. And they were the ones that, I don't know if it was just assessor's oversight that they missed that it was getting developed or what, but the purchase triggered it and they went back and got 3 years worth of taxes on it. But that's going to be dependent, again, on jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Arizona is another one that comes to mind, where it has to be farmed for the entire year. So if you purchase it later in the year and it loses that ag designation, if you're going off the prior year tax bill and assuming that is your taxes, that could be completely different because it will lose that classification. It'll charge you the full year for land as if it was not farmed.
Wow, definitely want to keep that on the radar when buying property in rural townships, which we tend to do, is buy in third-tier markets. Yeah.
Another thing to keep in mind, we don't specialize this here in Ryan's property tax practice, but transfer taxes, we recommend working with the attorney handling the closing because transfer taxes could vary depending on the jurisdiction and market that you're in. Another thing to note is reassessment upon sales. Kentucky's a perfect example of this, where their statutes dictate that a recent purchase price is the best evidence of value, and assessors enroll those purchase prices the year following, and they typically stay at the purchase price for the next handful of years. California is another unique one in that whatever time of the year you purchase the property, that's gonna reset the base year for California, and they'll go back and issue a supplemental assessment to capture the portion of the fiscal year that after that purchase, increasing that assessment to the purchase price. So it's always important to know, does a sale impact a reassessment in this jurisdiction or trigger a reassessment? And another thing to know too is it a disclosure state where you have to disclose the purchase price and the information about the sale, or is it a non-disclosure state where that could remain hidden? One thing we do to help with that, we offer pre-acquisition and pre-development analyses, and I know there are other firms that do this as well, where it gives a 2 to 5 year projection, typically a best case, most probable, worst case of what we expect to happen with those values and taxes after the acquisition. So it would capture, if it's a state that chases the sale price and is going to increase the assessment to that, if the assessor may not go all the way to the purchase price, but it's going to trigger a reassessment, or in the sake of Michigan, where there's a cap on the taxable value, where a sale will trigger the cap on the value to be uncapped, and that it could increase more in the year following the sale. So these reports are good to let you know of the potential effects of a sale and how it could impact the real estate taxes.
What I like is that you go municipality specific when you're evaluating that. It's not just some blanket process. And just like the federal tax code or state level or county or city, there's so many aspects to take into consideration when evaluating your future tax rate on a property. It's not just the purchase price times this many mills, whatever. It's literally what day of the year is it prorated? Does it go back? And how often does it reassess? Should you plan for an adjustment every time it reassesses? So definitely recommend anyone who's listening to reach out to Matthew when they're evaluating the purchase of a large scale commercial asset to be able to get one of those reports, because it's so valuable to know And that way you have something to lean on from an industry professional who does this day in and day out, as opposed to just, shooting from the hip and saying, well, it'll probably go up by 25% and then it'll probably go up by 10, and that's probably close enough. Trust me, those who live in Houston right now, that's not close enough right now. Not at all. Probably, yeah, crazy.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head too. It could vary. You could be in one township on one side of the street and cross over the street and be in another township, and it could be valued completely different. And same thing with the tax rates. Those tax rates could be completely different as well.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So things we would recommend looking for anytime there's a prepayment discount for paying your taxes early, we highly recommend taking that option. An example of this is down in Florida. If you pay your taxes by the end of November, you get a 4% discount on the real estate bill. If it's by the end of December, it's 3%, 2% by the end of January, and 1% at the end of February. Before that, the taxes are actually due in March. But if you pay early in one of those months, you do get a discount. And there are other jurisdictions throughout the country that also offer early payment discounts. An option that primarily is seen in Georgia is opting into reduced tax bills when appeals are pending. This goes back to something we talked about earlier, where you may have to file an appeal, but you may have to pay the taxes based off that full initial assessment, even though it may be the incorrect assessment. Then you have to wait for the refund to be generated. Georgia has a nice system where there is a reduced tax bill, and it has to do with either 85% of the value or the value from last year, depending on certain parameters. But you pay this reduced bill, and then at the end of the appeal, depending on what the outcome of that appeal is, if there's a slight difference, say maybe more taxes are owed than what that reduced tax bill is, they'll issue a supplemental bill that gives you a little bit longer to pay that full amount or that true up. Or if it gets reduced further than what they anticipated with that temporary bill, you would get a refund for the difference there. Responding appropriately to solicitations from municipalities. I know all property owners get these notices in the mail from the jurisdiction asking for your income and expense information, your rent rolls, any information about the property. And some jurisdictions are getting really good at making it look like it's mandatory, even though it's not, to try to trick their way into obtaining information they otherwise shouldn't have. So it's important. We recommend anytime the property owners that we represent get those notices to pass them along to us. There are jurisdictions, like I said earlier, too, in the Northeast that there is an annual requirement to file your income and expense information to the jurisdiction. But there are a lot of times where those requests aren't mandatory. You don't have to respond. There's no penalty if you don't respond. So we like to take a look at those to see if it could potentially hurt the property or be a way for the assessor to increase the assessment if you were to respond. Another thing, like we talked about, appeal deadlines vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So it's important to be on top of those, making sure your appeals get filed timely and appropriately. Some jurisdictions require that the appeal be physically mailed and received by the deadline date. Others will accept a postmark. If you bring it to the post office the day of the deadline and it gets that postmark, they'll still accept it, even if it's received a few days later. So that's important, because there's nothing worse than when an appeal deadline passes and someone comes to us and there is an appeal opportunity, but it's just unfortunately past the deadline and there's nothing we could do at that time. Reviewing assessors' records is important. I've seen it a lot where they may have the wrong square footage, and I've seen it where it benefits a property where they may have less square footage than what the actual property is, and it's beneficial because their value's lower because of that. And I've seen it more so on the side where they may have more square footage than what you have. And it's important to get that fixed because that's going to reduce the value in their model and should be an easy way to reduce that value and save some taxes there. If developing properties, it's important to know, does the jurisdiction offer TIF agreements? Is there any type of abatements or exemptions offered for developing in an area? A lot of times those jurisdictions want to have those conversations prior to the shovel ever hitting the ground. So it's important very early on before you start the development to inquire if there are any potential exemptions or abatements or anything along those lines.
So I love TIFs, but I'm probably one of the few people that truly understand what the benefit is. Can you go into that in a little bit more detail for us?
Yeah, so TIFs are a little unique, and every TIF is different. But what it is there's typically a TIF district where there's an area that falls within the TIF district, and it allows funding to, depending on some TIFs, some of the TIFs I've seen are, it gives the developer a way to fund making infrastructure changes or adding roads, sewers, things of that nature, lighting, running electric through whatever they're developing. And what it is you'll get your tax bill every year, and there's a set schedule on each TIF. So this is why it varies. Some could be, 25 years, others might be 10 years. So it's going to depend on that TIF agreement. But when the tax bill comes due, you still have an assessed value, you still have the tax rate, and those taxes are charged. But as opposed to that graph we showed very early on, where the school district's getting the funds, the county, the fire department, all of those, it would go back into this TIF pool. And then depending on how the TIF spells out where that benefit's going to go, it could go to repay the developer for those upfront costs that they put in for the infrastructure, things like that, or it could go to a myriad of other things depending on what's in that TIF agreement.
Absolutely. It doesn't necessarily always only apply to property taxes. It also applies to sales taxes as well. For retail developers, a TIF can make or break a deal, and whether or not it makes sense to put a new shopping center in or whatever. But they're highly incentivized because they bring jobs, they create, opportunities for a community to grow, and, building a brand new Walmart, there's no better way to bring more people in to a community than that. So you better believe they take advantage of that TIF.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to have conversations with the jurisdiction before the development, see if there's anything like that, or if they'd even be willing to make anything like that. But a lot of times they want to have those conversations before construction begins.
1000%. Yeah.
And the last slide here is just to monitor changes in your P&Ls. Sometimes, especially when we're reviewing a property, we're typically looking at year-end financials and rent rolls as of a very specific date, usually the date of value, which typically is January 1st of a given year. But if the value for the jurisdiction I oversee, the values come out in August, a lot could change between January and August that may not be reflected on that rent roll or on the financial statement from the prior year. So it's important to let us know what's going on. An example of this is actually, I just had a property for one of the property owners I work with that we reviewed, and we didn't recommend an appeal based on it was showing 6% vacant as of 12/31/23. However, there was a lease on there that ended up expiring or tenant vacated as of January 1st. So even one day later, that January 1st rent roll ended up showing the property was 40% vacant. So it's important to let us know anytime there's anything going on with the property that could negatively impact it. And that could make a big difference in a potential appeal.
Oh yeah, sounds like an anchor tenant moved out of a shopping center.
That's exactly what it was. And looking at the data we had, there was nothing to say it did. The lease on that 12/31 rent roll showed that it went past that, but they terminated their lease and it wasn't reflected until January 1st.
Well, definitely need to know that when you're in the process of an appeal.
Absolutely. And then you could go to the next slide here, but we always recommend having a property tax software. Lee said it perfectly, knowing when your appeal deadlines are, knowing when tax bill payments are due. That's something our system does. Lee has access to it. He could go in, look at all his properties very easily at a couple clicks of a button, see when tax payments are due, see when appeal deadlines are, see if things are under appeal. We're not saying you have to use our software, but we do want to put it out there that it is important to have a system monitoring all your properties. And then the next slide is another screenshot from a report generated from our system that our system does have a budget tool in there. So it's important to forecast out, similar to those tax projections when you're looking to purchase a property. We offer for your existing properties, looking out 1 or 2 years at what we anticipate to happen and budget. And, some systems will show it on a cash basis, accrual basis, and really give you a good snapshot of what to expect to happen with your property taxes over the next couple quarters. From key takeaways, as I said, basically everything I said is depending on your jurisdiction. So it's very good to understand the jurisdictions you operate in, the challenges that you may face, knowing what jurisdictions you're able to appeal in more easily or have those informal conversations, what jurisdictions are going to be tougher, being mindful of those assessment cycles, knowing when those reassessments fall, if sales impact a reassessment cycle, things of that nature. Really utilize the appeal process to minimize the expenses. We know property taxes are, in most cases, that one of the biggest expenses on the financials. So being able to monitor those, reduce those wherever possible can make a big difference. And then work alongside professionals who can assist in managing your property taxes, similar to what Lee said with the syndications, and relying on those experts. So you could focus on what you do well, and let us handle the property taxes and be an extension of your team to really help benefit you guys.
That's what we look at Ryan as a member of the team, just like we do for insurance or any other service that service provider that is a part of our overall team, property management, so on and so forth. Everybody brings value, and it's all about finding the best partner you possibly can in that industry that can advise you as best they possibly can. So let's go into the Q&A. I have a very, very strategic question that we did not cover yet, and that is, how do you get paid? How do you make money? Like, obviously everybody has to make a living. You're not here for free working. So how does Ryan earn their fee, and what do they normally charge?
Yeah, Ryan is our model is a contingency-based system. So it's based off the properties we appeal, the tax savings we generate. We typically charge a percentage of those tax savings that are achieved. And that could vary depending on the number of properties, depending where they're located. So I can't give an exact fee range, but it's typically a percentage of those fees somewhere, I guess, range-wise, I'd say anywhere 20, 40% of the tax savings achieved. And it could vary too, depending on market to market. But the better we do and the better we do for you and the more money we save you, that's how we get paid better.
That's how I like to pay people is upon their success, success related partnership. Therefore, we are in perfect alignment in our relationship. The more we save on our property taxes, the more your company can earn for being a part of our team. So that works perfectly for us, and we have no issue with that, relationship as a whole. And it's worked out really well for us in our favor.
Glad to hear that. And a big thing too with that is we're going to be as aggressive as possible to find those appeal angles. And if we file an appeal and we don't get a reduction, say it's one of those tougher jurisdictions, they're not willing to move off their value, there's no fee associated with us filing that appeal and trying to get some tax savings achieved.
Absolutely. So does anybody from the audience have any questions for Matthew while we still have him, providing his valuable time to us this evening? So if you have a question, feel free to either, raise your hand and speak out loud or add it into the chat.
I've got a comment to make, Matthew, if you can take this comment. I do know that, and I could add to this, is when transferring property from your name, even if it's going to an LLC that's got your name on it, that triggers a reassessment. And if you don't follow the processes correctly, like going through an attorney to show that it's still going to the same person, the reassessment, even if it's within 6 months, the reassessment just goes through the roof. So I've seen that happen. You mentioned that earlier a little bit on transferring the name, even though there's no money transfer, but even triggering a name transfer triggers a reassessment. So, I mean, just like to notify everybody out there that if they do transfer it into like an LLC, even though they own the LLC, it triggers a reassessment. And that's not what happens in our jurisdiction a lot. If you don't go through an attorney that, follows the correct, if they don't check the right box, you're messed up. Your taxes go up. So I'm not sure that. Go ahead.
What jurisdiction is that in, Sam?
I'm sorry?
What jurisdiction did that happen? It was in California?
San Diego, Orange County.
Yeah. So California, it's going to depend on market, but as soon as you said that, I had California in the forefront of my mind. You're exactly right. Even if 51% of the ownership transfers, and like Sam said, there could be no money involved, but if there's that ownership transfer, it would trigger that supplemental and would trigger a new base year value. So California caps their assessment growth at 2% per year. It could increase less than that unless there's something that happens and that would enroll a new base year value. So transfer of ownership, new construction, and that's where it gets uncapped and they could catch up. So they consider the 51% change of ownership as a base year event that they could issue a new value. And in the case that no money has transacted, they'll go to the market and find what other properties are selling for and enroll that value on there.
That's true. I've seen it happen several times, and I had to go back and resubmit my paperwork through an attorney. She wrote, she checked the right box, and sometimes what you're filling out, you think you know what you're doing. Best thing to do is just go through a mouthpiece and get it done the right way. The other thing, and you talk about fees. I've had commercial property in the past where we've had it reassessed, and the fees are run between 20 and 30%. So it's a pretty fair fee. Especially if they're capturing a $10,000 to $20,000 recapture, and you're getting a check back from the jurisdiction. You just write a check back to the consultant for 20% or 25% of that amount, which is, I think, is fair, because then you're getting $7,000 or $8,000 back in your pocket. So it's not a bad thing to do and run it through an organization like yours. So I'm all for it because I've done it before. The other thing is on reassessments on property, when your parents pass away, you make sure you get an appraisal on their houses or their property, because what happens then, that automatically reappraises. I mean, these jurisdictions are like sitting on the coattails of when people pass away, when name changes, they're constantly increasing the taxes as soon as possible. So if you're getting an appraisal, you can go back to the jurisdiction and say, no, it's not worth, $1 million. It's only worth 700,000. And I've got a professional appraisal here that states that. Sometimes that works, and you still have to refile. But in our jurisdiction here in San Diego and Orange County, even if you file for a reassessment, it takes anywhere from a year to 18 months to have them even come, return a letter or a call to you. So it's a long time. It's a long time. They don't turn over their cash, readily.
Yep, absolutely. California is one of the longer processes. Same thing with Minnesota. I see those appeals typically take 2 to 3 years to settle. But as you said, appraisals are very good evidence. In most cases, the best evidence you could have for an appeal. It is important to note too, there are different types of appraisals and uses for appraisals. So financing appraisals are going to make, look at all the good in a property and make it as rosy as possible and try to give you that highest value as possible. And then there's a property tax appraisal that's going to try to do the opposite. They're going to try to come in and get the lowest value possible. So it's important to know what kind of appraisal you're obtaining and what kind of appraiser you're using as well to make sure it's fitting for whatever your needs are.
Agreed.
So we have a couple of questions that have come through the chat. The first one is there a good way to know if a situation is worthy of having a consultation? I don't like to waste anyone's time, and if there's a filter or series of questions to help determine that, it would be great.
Yeah, I'd say we typically have property owners that have as few as 3 to 5 properties. We have some that have hundreds of locations. So that there's no size client that we necessarily say is too big or too small. We'll look at everything. Typically, we do stay away from single family residential in the practice that I'm in the property tax. We do have a single family team that does handle that. But typically we're looking at commercial properties. For multifamily, I'd say 20 units or bigger are typically what we do, but we have reviewed smaller in the past.
Right. And if someone has a single family house where the property value, assessed value has skyrocketed, you have a department that handles single family houses as well and can give a referral?
We do have a single family residential team, so I could definitely reach out to them and try to get the right point of contact.
Awesome. Yeah. So even if you got a house, just, they can help. Number 2 is the Property Point database that you mentioned in the slide. Does it provide the information about jurisdiction, what jurisdictions look like, or is there another database to be able to find that? Like timeline, I'm imagining this is like timelines, due dates, how they assess, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question. One of the nice features about Property Point is that we do have a function where you could look at the map of the United States, you could click into Illinois, and from there you could find all of the assessors within Illinois. And clicking on that there, see all the timelines of when appeal deadlines typically are, when tax bill due dates are. If it's a state that has personal property where you have to file your personal property returns, it can show that. The one caveat is it's a little bit tougher to nail down when appeal deadlines are in jurisdictions that change every year and that are based on, so for Illinois, it's 30 days after the date on the notice, but we try to give a good estimate based off historical deadlines and when they've fallen in the past. But yes, there is a feature where you could get some of that information for all of the states in the United States.
And how much does access to the property point database cost?
If we represent your properties, there is no cost to having access to Property Point. So we would have your properties in there. You could have unlimited users. So if there's a few of you, Lee, Megan, if you guys wanted access, I think you may have access, but we could set you up with a username and password that's unique to each of you, and you could go in there and access Property Point.
The property tax appeal process is one of Megan's roles and strengths on our team. She does that, insurance, and a myriad of other things as well. So that's not my specialty, but I'm sure she has gotten in there and played with it a bunch of times. Where, for the audience, where can they go to be able to find access to the database and get your contact and get in touch with you?
Yeah, it should be on Ryan.com. There's a team directory. We have numerous practices. I forgot to include a slide that has my contact information, but if everyone has a pen and paper, I could say it real quick. It's just Matthew, MATTHEW .Wagner, WAGNER at Ryan.com. And I will also throw it in the chat.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. So Matthew, MATTHEW Wagner at Ryan, RYAN.com. If you're interested in getting in touch with Brian about a tax reassessment, please do. And I want to say thanks to Matthew for coming on and being our industry specialist for the evening. Big round of applause for Matthew. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
And
everyone.
unless anybody has any questions that we weren't able to answer, we're going to adjourn the meeting for the evening. And I want to say thank you. We have this monthly live webinar every second Tuesday of the month. And if you're not already a member of the Make It Happen Multifamily Facebook page, please do join. You can find it Facebook, Make It Happen Multifamily. If you ever find yourself in St. Louis, Missouri, reach out to me. We also do monthly live in-person events on the fourth Thursday of every month, where we actually go to a property, a commercial size multifamily property, with the owner, and we tour that property and learn about their process of acquiring and owning large scale apartment complexes. This month on May 30th, which actually happens to be my birthday, we're going to be touring a property that is actually available for sale. It's an A-class, I believe, 48 unit apartment complex here in St. Louis. We're going to be touring the property with the owner, learning about how what he did with the property since he acquired it. And we're going to be underwriting the property live in front of a crowd, so that people can say, "You're asking way too much money for it," or maybe, "Heck, I've got an offer for you right now." You never know. So, and last but not least, if you're interested in learning about investing passively in real estate, you can find me at greenforestcapital.com. Once again, Matthew, thank you again for joining us, and I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and thank you to the audience for coming and joining us as well. So have a great evening, and thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Matthew.
Lee.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Matt.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Great information.
Mhm.
Perfect.